Oh, my political aspirations include running in every election until marijuana is legal. Fortunately, oh, this makes it much better because it is legal in Ontario, so if I lived here, I wouldn't need to run right now. And but the thing is, liberty has to be worked on at all times to be preserved. There's obviously a lot of reactive elements in Parliament that will be anxious to even reconvene early to recriminalize marijuana. And you know, it's emotional issues like this one that can get Parliament to do something like that, return early. But that's why it's up to the people of Ontario who are smoking marijuana, who can now do so free of fear, and that's very important. The fact that it's not unlawful means paraphernalia is not unlawful anymore. It means all sorts of things that people haven't thought of. That means people can open clubs that cater to marijuana smokers without any fear of arrest. In fact, you can't legally deny a business license to anybody who allows marijuana smoking because it's not illegal. So it has a whole domino effect. It affects municipal bylaws, provincial bylaws. The DARE program can no longer go in and refer to marijuana as an illegal drug when they go to schools. Students, in fact, are allowed to possess marijuana at any time, anywhere in Ontario. And no one can say you can't bring marijuana into a public facility. You can't light it in a public facility because smoking all substances is against the law. But since marijuana is no longer regulated in any way whatsoever, it was simply directly suspended from any law, then there's no regulation on marijuana. So if you go to the lettuce or tomatoes, are there somewhere? Consulted with all the lawyers on this, and I've read the decision, and it is very, very clear. There's absolutely no reason for any police department to be vague about this law. The government tried to go to the Court of Appeal to stay, and the Court of Appeal denied that stay. They were
stand over there and get shot.
That person tried to get the law stayed, and they were unsuccessful. So the court's clearly sending a message that people are allowed to possess marijuana. They can do anything with marijuana, and no other bylaw is effective now because it has to deal with marijuana as an illegal substance. So previous municipal bylaws that said paraphernalia cannot be sold or put in window displays, that's all struck down. Those are now pipes for legal consumption of a legal product. And it affects every level of government. Federal law will be affected by it, where it applies to people in marijuana smoking. The people in prison will be able to get marijuana legally if they require, with no effort whatsoever, because it is perfectly legal. The prisons won't be able to stop people from using marijuana inside a prison. So people have to understand this has incredible implications for every aspect of our way of life. All those terrible punishments that everybody in the marijuana community had to endure and deal with are all over. And we can sue the police if they don't obey this law, even if it's only a law that lasts 5 months, because the earliest Parliament can correct it would be about November 15th. They'd need to be in the House for at least 2 months to go through all the appropriate committees and 3 readings. It hasn't even had its first reading yet. And the Court of Appeal decision, even if they heard it in early August, won't bring its decision back also till November, December. So it's a certainty that marijuana is absolutely legal in a way unlike anywhere else in the Western world, where at least in every other country it's regulated to some small degree, like in Holland, but it's no longer regulated, and every other law that hinges upon marijuana being criminal are wrong and will be struck down as void also in every community.
Can you just start the top again?
So that he would take people's marijuana if an officer came upon it. And that is wrong, because marijuana is now a lawful product. It can be taken anywhere, a tomato, a lettuce, or anything. It is not even regulated in the same way cigarettes are. There's no age limitation on it. And now I would suggest that if people wanted to legalize marijuana, they might have that opportunity. In a legal environment, the government could actually acknowledge it's legal and restrict its sale, for example.
What are the ramifications?
Well, if the government of Ontario were adept and they wanted to adapt to the law, then they would begin licensing establishments and regulate it. See, you can regulate something that's legal. So now that it is legal, a government could actually regulate it to whom may get it or under what circumstances. In fairness to the state, I don't approve of that necessarily, but they now, in any legal environment, can set regulations on how such a thing is distributed and sold, which is the opportunity really that people in a big city like Toronto want to see. You would literally become the first real Amsterdam anywhere outside the world with a complete legal authority to regulate a legal business.
Why did you choose Police Heaquarters?
Well, because I felt that if the chief constable wanted to establish a tone for the summer, he could either let people be and obviously not send officers out to take people's marijuana, or I'm sure they might make a statement on their own, and you'll hear that. But the fact is that we're a nation of law. laws. One great thing about Canadians is that everybody takes their disputes to court or to some neutral party. We don't resort to violence in this country. So I think police departments, politicians, cabinet ministers feel bound by these laws. Like they have the same court of appeal that originated this law is the same one, exact same court of appeal that gave you the same-sex marriage law that's now accepted by 9 out of 10 provinces. And it is the identical same court that ordered the law abolished if the government didn't succeed in fulfilling the court's mandate. The government did not fulfill that mandate. Then the law became void, and 18 months later it was applied in court, and now it's been accepted by an appeal court, so it's binding in all the courts in Ontario. And from there, when the judgment is read, it's quite clear that they wanted cannabis right out of the legislation, so it exists in an unregulated state. And so the police have to obey that law. That's what we are. We're a nation bound by laws. If the police defy laws blatantly and accept to refuse that this is the will of a properly constituted court, and that of course reflects a just situation, then that would violate our rights, and that might be subject to law.
For the uninitiated, what are the pleasures of smoking pot? What do you do?
Well, when people who don't smoke pot ask me what pot does, I tell them it's like a sixth sense. Here you have your hearing, taste, smell, audio, touch, and it adds a nice twist to all those. For example, I can feel the sun more strongly on the side of my face than I might normally. And I'm aware that that's what happens when I smoke pot. I have a bit of a dry mouth, which makes me want to drink more. And I would think that probably in half an hour, when the cameras are gone, I'll probably feel hungry because I didn't eat anything in anticipation of being somewhat nervous, because it's a very provocative thing to challenge the police, because first of all, if they think you're humiliating them and putting them in a bad spot, then which is not really what I want. I just want to demonstrate that the right is right. So I'm going to take anyone's life, like my father right, if I was a 19-year-old, and he has to realize I've left home. And I'm on my own now, but it's very patriarchal, I think, and paternal for the chief police to say he's going to have an officer take someone's pot. And I'm not concerned about organized groups that meet in numbers, but of the individual on the street. That individual should be safe. Their pot should be protected under law, because now it is.
You don't have to worry about it.
People pay money for marijuana. It's
I really want them that,
right?
Well, you don't have to
as
convince
soon as the
them.
government
That's their problem. I mean, if they're ignorant, tell them to smoke themselves, and then make a decision.
I don't really think we have to worry about it. Yeah, well, they don't have good eyes anyway.
I'm not be here at the Mark.
On everything from insurance.
Mark, why are you doing this?
Why am I doing this? Because Ontario has an extraordinary opportunity under law to make this the most advanced jurisdiction in the world in the regulation and controlled sale and release of marijuana. Because now the city can actually say, well, listen, if you're growing marijuana in your home, which could be legal, we want to know that that's a safety-approved electrical system. You have to be licensed in your home. It doesn't cost more than the cost of the inspection, but because that's what would happen under a lawful environment. If you were adding electrical wiring to your home with some substantial note, you would have to get a permit and a variance and a variety of things through City Hall. Well, a simplified measure where somebody comes out and inspects all your wiring, makes sure you're operating safely and legally, gives you authority and gives you you pay $200, and that's the cost of the inspection, and there's your license. You're entitled to grow in your own home, and your neighbors won't have to worry. Everybody knows what's going on, and that's perfectly legal now, and that's how it'll have to evolve. And you'll all think it's so civilized, and people will realize, well, this all makes sense. It's all out in the open, where organized crime will evaporate. That's the incredible thing, is that if this decision is upheld, all organized crime eventually will flee this, because it'll be so easy to control for everybody to do it.
The Association of Chiefs of Police says the exact opposite. They say it's going to lead to all kinds of violence. In fact, the quote I think I read in today's paper was people are going to die.
But you see, that won't happen, because freedom never brings those kind of consequences. When we extend more freedom to the citizens of Ontario, this is a very sophisticated urban province. I think we're talking about the most advanced, educated, and communication media savvy in the world. They have access to all the information they need to make a decision. I think most of them would say that they don't fear their neighbor smoking marijuana, and if everything were regulated and controlled and everybody knew what was going on, and you knew where the marijuana was coming from, how it was being sold, where profits were going, after all, you'd begin collecting income tax right away for the province, which will be substantial even this year alone. The PST and GST that would be added on to any regulated retail sales would add up to millions. It would reverse the tourist drain that's going on in Toronto right now, where you're facing probably the worst tourism drought in 30 years. And believe me, there's 160 million people worldwide of all income standards who smoke marijuana. 160 million people who would go to the first place in the Western world where marijuana would be legal is like a mind-boggling thought. And so when this gets out, as it is slowly getting out throughout the world, just like you'll get homosexuals coming to Toronto because it's going to be considered a cool hip place, and this isn't a bad thing. This is exactly what Toronto would need to have, is that in the face of all these terrible things that have happened in Toronto, SARS obviously, but is that this is still the coolest place in the world to be right now. And the most enlightened. So this is the negative thing. This is the best thing that ever happened to Toronto, I assure you.
So